So the recording is in progress. Thank you very much and welcome again. I am very happy to see some guests from the United States and maybe from other parts of the world. Here is the IUG Germany, this community which is still active, and we have the connections, we have the relations here in Germany. We continue with Informix, not only because this is a very good product, but also because the contact with people is an advantage for every user, for every customer, because we can support each other, we can make projects together, we can interchange the knowledge, and with this way of working, the people can continue doing the work which is necessary to keep running this beautiful database. And not only the database, but also all the other products around Informix. Today we will hear something about the new version, the version 14.10.FC7, which was released at the end of last year. Which are the new features? What can we expect on that? Maybe also which features or functions are now more efficient. And for this, thank you very much, Dr. Weiniger, that you helped us to have the contact to the colleagues in the United States. We are happy to have some visitors now from the United States to have this meeting to interchange ideas. So let's start. In the next 50 minutes, Mr. Doe will give us this information in his knowledge. Thank you very much again for being with us. And we are very happy to see and to hear something new from Informix. Now it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate. As the good doctor said, my name is Carlton Doe, and I have been using Informix for many, many years. I was originally a end user, like many of you. I started learning Informix by reading the books. I joined a company. They said, we have this database. It's called Informix. We have very little knowledge about what it does. Can you figure it out? And this was back in 1988, 1989, something like that. And so I started learning Informix by reading the books and have continued on ever since. So today, I am speaking on the latest features in 14.10 XC7. As you will see, there aren't a lot of big things in here. There are a few nice changes. The reason that this fix pack is so small is because we are concentrating on our next major release of Informix. We don't know if it's going to be 1450, whether it will be 1510. The number right now is unknown, but we anticipate that there will be a major release sometime towards the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So development continues on the product. We have, our HCL partner is continuing to develop it and add new features and support it just like we have in the past. So that's just a brief overview of what to expect in the future. And obviously when it is released, I will be back and we'll be sharing what those new features are and how to use them. So here is the agenda, the things we will be covering today. Some of these items are just one slide long because they're not very difficult to understand nor to implement. So let's begin. And as he said, if you have questions, either raise your hand or put it in the chat. In between each section, I will be pausing for questions. So don't hesitate to ask. So the first thing is an undocumented change. I looked yesterday in the documentation and didn't see that this had been corrected. So this is secret news that I'm sharing with you, if you will. In FC7, the mirror parameter, which used to be optional, for example, you could turn this on and then it enabled you to create mirrors of chunks and DB spaces and so forth. That mirror parameter has been turned on by default and then has been removed from onconfig. So you no longer have the ability to turn off mirroring. It's there, it's enabled, it's permanent. What is interesting though, is that mirror path, which used to be populated in earlier versions of the onconfig, is now null. So in the FC7 onconfig.std, you will see that mirror is gone and mirror path is empty. In previous versions, for example, in FC6, you could turn mirror on or off, and there was a value in mirror path that said, create a mirror of the root DB space in, and the value was Informix dir temp. So it was going into a flat file. Well, what I discovered is I took a FC6 onconfig file and I used that to create an FC7 instance. And all of a sudden, I had a mirror device in my instance. And I was trying to figure out why that happened. And that was because the instance now is ignoring this mirror parameter completely. So even though I had it turned off, it was ignored because FC7 says that mirroring is enabled. And because my FC6 instance had this default value in it, or my FC6 onconfig file had this default parameter in it, it created a mirror for me. I discovered this the hard way. I had multiple instances on the same machine, and they were all in an HA cluster. And as you know, in an HA cluster, if you have multiple instances of that cluster on the same physical server, you have to use absolute path names rather than, or excuse me, you have to use relative path names rather than absolute path names. And what I found the hard way is I had multiple instances trying to create and use this same mirrored temp DB space because I had the same onconfig file. So the HA cluster was crashing all over the place. And I thought we had this massive bug in FC7 related to the HA cluster, when it was in fact this mirror path being carried over from FC6 that caused the problem. So as I said, this is only if you are using an FC6 or earlier onconfig and creating a new instance, if you are initializing. If that is the case, obviously mirror should be disabled because it's no longer active, and you should also comment out mirror path. When that is done, you can create your new FC7 instance, and you will notice there is no mirrored root DB space. If you have an existing instance and you do an in-place migration, so you have your FC6 instance, you turn it off, you install the FC7 binary, you turn the instance back on, it will not create that mirror path or that mirrored chunk. However, what you will get is an error in the startup and in your message log saying that it cannot open or use the root mirror path device until you comment or empty out mirror path. So that is, like I said, it is an undocumented change. It's something you need to be aware of if you are creating new instances and using older versions of your onconfig file. So are there any questions on that?
If I understand correctly, this was an error, or it was a feature which was not unknown. And this depends now on the version I am using, if the mirror chunk is activated or not.
Correct. It is undocumented in FC7. So in FC6, as I said, oops, let me go back here. In FC6, and earlier you had the mirror parameter here. And if you turned it off, yes, as this is, then this parameter was ignored completely. Well, in FC7, this is gone. So if there is any value in mirror path, the instance will try and use it. If you are initializing a new instance, it will create a mirror of the root DB space in that location. If, however, you are migrating an existing instance using that in-place migration, you will get this mirror chunk error every time the instance is started, until you either erase or comment out mirror path in that older version of the onconfig.
Okay, thank you. I see.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, moving forward. So throughout 1410, we've been making some significant advancements and improvements and efficiency in Java, both Java within our client drivers and Java within the engine, what we refer to as JFoundation. Additional enhancements were made in FC7. Now, there was nothing of great note here. It was just general maintenance. We upgraded to some of the latest releases of some drivers, but in general, there's nothing that you as an end user need to be concerned about. But it just shows that we are trying to maintain and use the most current version of the Java drivers and libraries and so forth in 1410. And this is different than in the past, where we didn't touch Java for years and we were woefully way behind. So again, there's nothing tremendous here you need to be aware of, other than we continue to stay current. And the same thing applies to our GS kit, or what is called the Global Security Kit. This is a set of functionality that is distributed by IBM to a number of its products. So for example, GS Kit is in DB2 and it's in Cognos and other products. And it allows us to use TLS libraries and other security-oriented features and functionality. So there were enhancements to the GS Kit in FC7. What were those enhancements? Again, it's just compatibility with the latest libraries and so forth. There's nothing that you as an end user would necessarily notice, but we're implementing fixes and so forth so that this environment is as secure as it can be. So that's Java and GS Kit enhancements. Are there any questions on either of those? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to the IFX Deploy Assistant. So the IFX Deploy Assistant and the IFX Deploy Utility were released in Informix 11.7. And these two utilities were primarily for partners who were embedding Informix inside of their application. And what this utility gave them the ability to do is specify what parts of, so they had a source system that was set up for their application. and it had certain amount of data in it and so forth. They could go to this source system and they could say, I want to extract these components of the engine binary. So obviously you would choose the base level features. But if they weren't using ER, they could ignore that component of the binary. If they weren't using this component, they could ignore it and so forth. So they could select which components of the Informix binary they wanted to use inside their application. They could then go into a source instance and specify which DB spaces they wanted to extract and include. And these DB spaces would contain their tables with the data in them and so forth that needed to be distributed with the application when it was first turned on. And it would be all tied up into this nice flat file bundle that they could then include inside of their application binary, and the installer could install their application. Then it could call the IFX deploy utility, which would put down the Informix binary components they wanted, create the instance, create the DB spaces, and so forth. And these are just some pictures of what the utility looked like. So you could specify what the source instance was. You specified, like I said, the components of the binary. You selected which DB spaces you wanted. And then the engine said, okay, fine, here's what I'm going to do. And it would go off and do it. And there were obviously a graphical interface to this. And there was also a command line interface as well. So that was in the product for a number of years. However, in real life, it was never used. Customers just didn't find it provided enough value, or they wanted to use their own mechanisms to create this type of a initial footprint. Plus, as an Informix product, we had released the IFX clone utility as well as CDR migrate server, which allows you to migrate data from one environment into another. And so we had much better ways of populating targets from a source environment. As a result, we're withdrawing this utility so we don't have to maintain, and we don't have to maintain something that's basically not being used. Now, if you were using it, you can start crying now if you want, but I don't think too many people will be sad that it's gone. So that is the removal of IFX Deploy Assistant. Are there any questions?
Is somebody now from the participants which was using this Informix Deploy utility?
Yes.
Of course, Mr. Kalusinski, tell us what was the advantage, and do you think it's now good enough what we are getting as a substitution?
It was a horror to use it. I had to install about 15,000 instances for a cache automat. And we used this EFX deploy assist because of several different environments. It was a lot of testing and bug finding. I phoned nearly every day with Liesel Bach until we got a solution that worked for this customer. This was 10 years ago. And it was the only time I had to use it. It took me about 1.5 months, and I'm glad to forget it.
Well, I'm sorry for the pain you experienced. You are not the only customer who had issues with it. Okay. So now a minor change, a minor update, if you will. With enterprise replication and change data capture. So historically, if you were performing an in-place table alter and you had ER or change data capture active, that operation could cause a flood of page out of sync errors to occur. Now, in a slow alter, which is an alter that we basically lock the table and make whatever the schema and data changes are required, these types of errors never occurred because we were changing not only the schema of the page, but also the data on the page at the same time. But with an in-place alter, we would go through and update the schema in the metadata of the table, but the table's pages themselves didn't change until you updated data on that page. Then we would convert the page to whatever the latest schema version was, or the schema version is. And that's what was causing these flood of page out of sync errors. So in FC7, we are enforcing some rules. And these rules are, first, if you're using change data capture, you must stop capturing data. And there is this CDC end capture function that you need to run, which will terminate the extraction of data. The second rule is that you must disable full row logging. And there is this CDC set full row logging function that you need to execute. You can then go in and do your in-place alter. We would then strongly recommend you do a update table, set column 1 equal to column 1. So each page's data is updated to the new table schema. Then you can go back in, turn back on full row logging, and restart the CDC capture process. So those rules are now being enforced. If you try and do an in-place alter without ending capture and without setting full row logging off, the operation will error out and stop. So just so you know, we're now enforcing that. And this is the new function which allows you to enable or disable full row logging with CDC so that you can execute this in-place alter. Are there any questions on that? We now have a new flag for the Oncheck command, and it is a -W with a seconds value. And what that enables you to do is execute an Oncheck command. And in the past, if there was a lock or something that was preventing the Oncheck command from completing, the Oncheck command would just fail. Now you can do Oncheck minus whatever the flags are, -W and a value, and the command will wait that number of seconds. If the lock is released or whatever the block is, within that amount of time, the Oncheck command will complete and you will get your answer. If at the end of that amount of time, the block is still there, then the command will error out. Now, you should set this value, this -W value, to a reasonable amount of time. And you could define what is reasonable. Is it 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds? It's up to you. However, if you simply say Oncheck minus, flag, 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 -W with no time value at all, that command will wait indefinitely for the block to release. Now that might not be what you want to have happen. So again, we strongly encourage you to use a reasonable amount of time with this new -W flag. And that is this new flag. Are there any questions on it?
Well, I think that's very dangerous that, of course, everybody understands that if I use that Oncheck wait function, I should set a reasonable number of seconds. But if for any reason I forget to do that or whatever, then my system will stop forever.
No, I didn't say the system. I did not say the system will stop. I said the command will wait forever.
Okay. Thank you. Then now I understand.
Yeah. All we're saying is that you can have the command wait or not, and if you want it to wait, set a reasonable value, but if you don't, that command will sit there in the instance. It will show up. Your session will hang, if you will. And it will continue to wait for whatever that block condition is to be released. Obviously, you can go in and kill the session, but it's much better to set a reasonable time value. So now we move on to a change to Onstat. There is now a -I flag. So a new flag has been added to Onstat. And I like to refer to Onstat as the utility that just keeps on giving. It seems like every release, there is a new flag or there's a new change, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I sarcastically say, what? A new flag? Say it isn't true. What this I flag gives you is general index information for your indices within that particular instance. So you'll see how many times your B tree indexes have been searched, the number of modifications to your indices, the number of inserts and deletes and so forth, how many times reverse scans have been executed, or the number of nodes have been split. So for example, if you're doing a large amount of inserts within a certain value range in the index, we may need to split a branch node of the index. So you can start seeing how many times these splits occur. And there's more information that we will provide. I encourage you to read the documentation to understand all the nuances of it. But when you execute, but that's what this new flag gives you. Are there any questions on it?
Did you find any value in this information? I tried it out, but it's for my several thousand indexes. I cannot see which index was split several times, which index was merged.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big number for my thousands of tables.
Right. So it would be reasonable to assume that there might be an enhancement to this, where we might be able to focus on perhaps an individual database and look at the index operations within a database, or perhaps on a specific index within a database that is not there at the moment. I'm not saying it will be released in the next fix pack, but what I would recommend you do is go to the Informix request for enhancement area, that web page, and put in a request that says, can we have more granular results from the -I flag? Say, can we make it at an index level or at a database level, so that it can be much more focused. But this is what we have at this moment in time. Okay, so the next area is enhancements to read-ahead reporting. And this particular functionality is very much a work in progress. So there were some nice new features that were introduced in FC7. And with these new features, a discussion was started on how we can make it even better. So it would be reasonable to assume there will be more functionality in whatever the next fix pack is, or in v.next. So what did we do? We added 4 pseudo tables to the SysMaster database. And these pseudo tables contain information about various aspects of read ahead and read ahead functionality. For example, what the queues look like, how many daemons are running, read ahead statistics broken down by partition, as well as broken down by thread. And there are very specific Onstat, well, there's two specific Onstat commands, new Onstat commands, that allow you to isolate either the partition or the thread information in general. This is the schema for these pseudo tables. So you can look at them and understand what exactly it is we're capturing and so forth, and write your own queries for understanding read ahead if you want. Now, I have a very small test instance that I work with. There was not, there's almost no data in it. So when I ran the general Onstat-G read ahead command, there wasn't a lot of information in it, but this now gives you a much broader, much more comprehensive view at a high level of what is occurring with read ahead. The idea was to give you information into the percentage of usage in your read ahead. So with this information, we could actually go in and figure out whether, exactly what type of read ahead operations were occurring. Were you going after data pages? Were you going after index leaves? Was it a combination of data out of the index? Was it partitions? Was it last committed and so forth? And as I said, we could look at read ahead and evaluate it based on the percentage of queried pages that came from this read ahead cache. But what we discovered in our conversation is that it's great to know what a percentage value is, but it's even better to know how many pages are actually being used. For example, if you have a system that has a small amount of memory in it, while it makes sense to try and enable read ahead so that the instance pre-queries the data that we think you're going to use, if you have a small amount of data, a small amount of memory, we could be thrashing these read ahead buffers, trying to guess where you're going to go and trying to put data into read ahead that you don't actually use. So in other words, we may be overcommitting or overpopulating read ahead when it's not necessary. So as I said, in the next fix pack, we will be releasing more information that allows you to better tune your read ahead parameters for what's actually being used rather than just a percentage of values. So look for, like I said, look for more soon. But in the meantime, we do have these new pseudo tables, this new Onstat-G flag that you can call, or you can write your own queries. So are there any questions on that? So the last item we're going to talk about is the graphical utility, IHQ. And in FC7, we released IHQ version 1.6. Now, IHQ is the replacement for the Open Admin tool that was released in, I think it was either 1110 or 1150. I can't remember exactly when. I'm back. So IHQ was released in, like I said, either 1110 or 1150 as the graphical tool for monitoring, in some cases, administering Informix. It was Adobe Flash based, and so that introduced a whole host of security and other problems. So it was replaced with this Informix HQ, or just IHQ product. I think it was in 1410 FC1, if memory serves. And since then, we have been improving and upgrading IHQ through all the various fix packs. Now, it was IHQ and IHQ only that introduced the log4j Java vulnerability. And that has been patched. There are now a W1 fix pack for 1410 FC7 and 12.10, I think it's FC15 W1, which corrects that log4j vulnerability in the binary. But as I said, it was only within IHQ that it existed. And frankly, it was a very, very low risk vulnerability, but we patched it and released it and released the patch so that you could work around it. But anyway, inside of this 1.6 release of IHQ, there were a number of things that were added. We cleaned up and clarified some of the documentation so it's easier to understand. We supposedly gave you the ability to look at query plan execution. And as you'll see, I could never get this to work for me, but they say it's in there. And then there was some enhancements to the HA cluster functionality, some search capabilities, and some storage manager enhancements as well. So let's go through each of these in general. So now, in the IHQ documentation, there is additional and clearer messaging and information on how you use logging within IHQ and how you can start and stop IHQ using the Java commands instead of the new shell scripts. So looking at logging, IHQ uses the log4j2 library, and by default, it uses the info level of messaging. And you can obviously set this up for both the server component and the agent component. There is now documentation which explains how you can customize this logging information either in the server XML or the agent XML file. It also explains how you can use a rolling log function with various trigger and rollover policies so that you can prune your logs. And that's now all fully described within the documentation. As far as starting IHQ, in the initial release, your only option was to start IHQ with a Java command. Then in IHQ 1.2, we introduced a shell script that you could call. Unfortunately, that shell script had a number of, I won't call them bugs, let's just say there were some operational anomalies, things that just didn't work the way it was supposed to. So in 1.4 version of IHQ, there were numerous changes to this shell script functionality. Then in FC6, we released IHQ 1.5 when we finally fixed that shell script functionality. And it works the way it's supposed to now. And there were a number of other functional enhancements to IHQ 1.5 that were released in the previous fix pack. Well, while the shell scripts are my preferred way of starting the IHQ server and the IHQ agents, if you choose to use the raw Java commands, there's now additional documentation in there on how to use them properly so that you don't get a bunch of error messages displayed and the functionality actually works the way you expect it to. So again, that's all been enhanced in the documentation. So any questions on those doc upgrades? Okay, moving on. Within the schema manager component of IHQ, you could always execute an SQL statement. You could type in whatever command you wanted, hit run, and then it would go ahead and execute. What is new in 1.6, supposedly, is the ability to set explain on, if you will, on the command. Now, there's no option to say set explain on avoid execute. So the command will actually execute, But you now supposedly have the option to click on the execution plan tab and look at what the query, what the query plan was. Now, for this to work, you must have SQL tracing enabled. So if you try and run a query and you click run, then hit execute plan or execution plan, you will get this error here, this message that says, I can't do that unless you enable tracing. If you click on that button there, on that link, you will be brought to this screen where you can enable tracing, and you can set it for local or global, and whether you wanted it high or low, and the number of traces, and what database you want to trace, and so forth. Now, this tracing is only active for this IHQ session. It does not enable tracing on the entire instance. It does not enable tracing on any of the other sessions that would be active within the instance. It's just for this IHQ connection. It's also not permanent. So if you restart IHQ or restart the session or you restart the instance, the tracing values that you set will be reset to default. But when tracing is turned on, again, you can say select value from customer, you can click on the execution plan, and in the you're supposed to get an answer. I never did. No matter how simple or how complex the SQL statement, I never got an answer back. All I would get is this fetching the query plan, and then it would error out and say, do you want to try again? And I clicked that button multiple times for multiple queries, and it never worked. So I wrote development, and I said, what's going on? And they said, well, it works for me. Maybe it's taking too long. If the query plan takes 10 seconds or longer to generate, we'll error out. Well, I don't see how select star from customer could generate a query plan that takes 10 seconds or more to create, but who knows? Maybe for you in your environment, this will work, but it didn't work for me. So, as we say in English, take this with a grain of salt. It might or might not work for you, but supposedly it's there. Okay. As far as the IHQ utility and the HA cluster is concerned, there was very minimal information about the HA cluster within the instance. For example, this is a view of a 1.5 IHQ. I have 4 instances up and running, as you can see on the left-hand side, but you would never know that they are in an HA cluster. The only way you did know is if you actually went to that sub-menu and clicked on the cluster topology, and then and only then would you know that these instances were in some sort of an HA environment. Well, that has changed now. There is much more information. The tool is much more HA cluster aware. So now at the highest level, you can see all of your active and inactive instances, and you can immediately see, are they in an HA cluster? Is it an updatable secondary? Is it a read-only secondary? And so from the very highest level and on down, as you dive in deeper, the tool is HA cluster aware, including once you dive into the HA screen itself, we now have lag time statistics. So you can look and see how far behind is a particular secondary from the primary. So you can determine whether or not you need to either increase resources on that physical node, or perhaps you have a network issue that is preventing data from flowing efficiently to that particular node. And the lag time feature can help you diagnose that. We now have cluster metrics and SMX metrics available to you. Now this is on my little test system. So I had 4 nodes running inside of a VM environment. It wasn't as though I was running a data warehouse or, I'm not Walmart, if you will, running thousands and thousands of transactions a second. But you can start to see information such as transaction latency, some SMX throughput information, apply rates, and so forth to help you diagnose the health and welfare of your HA cluster. So this, for example, is SMX information, whether or not you have encryption enabled, whether or not compression is enabled, the number of retries that have occurred once it arrives at the target. This is additional information now that you could get at from the command line, is now available to you within the IHQ tool itself. In some cases, you can review all of the parameters around HA, but in some cases, you can actually tune the parameters for your HA cluster, So in some cases, you can tune the parameters for HA, and you can also tune them at a node specific level. However, those changes, well, let me get to that in just a second. As I said, the tool is HA aware, so no matter where you go inside of the tool, it will display what the state of a particular instance is. Is it part of an HA cluster? What type of node is it? Is it updatable? Is it read-only, and so forth? And when you try and make changes to a particular node, if it is not allowed by its node type, you will get an error. For example, I'm working on a particular secondary that is read-only. Well, I cannot grant privileges, or I cannot create a database or create a table because I'm on a read-only node. That's now enforced through IHQ. And by the way, that rule is enforced even if you have Uber admin privileges. We will still prevent you from doing what you are not supposed to do. So that's a nice feature. We expanded search capabilities throughout the tool. So for example, if you go to system reports, this is a list of all of the built-in reports. Obviously, you can create your own. But if you are looking for a specific type of report, we can now search either the report name or the report description to find the reports that might be what you're looking for. So for example, I can use the word cache in the search bar, and it comes up with 3 different reports that could be of value to me. So that is a rather simple search criteria, but you can also have a compound search criteria where I say cache plus table. And again, it will search through either the name or the description of the report and isolate those reports that could be of interest to me. Now, what this search function cannot do is search within the results of a report. For example, if you're looking for a report that brings back a value for dirty buffers, unless the term dirty is used in the report name or in the description, we're not going to be able to search and find for it. So think of it as it can only search on the page that is displayed. But almost all of the IHQ windows now have this search functionality on them, so that you can go in. For example, this is the config, changing the onconfig file. Well, I want to see all of the onconfig parameters that affect caching. You can put cache in the search parameter, and boom, here are the list of those parameters. And then you could use the one you want and make whatever modification. In some cases, you can search for data values that are on the page. In other cases, only the description. I have not found a rule or a reason on when it's implemented one way versus another. So you get to experiment and discover what works for you on any individual page. That is searching within IHQ. Let's see, okay. I have, I think, one left. Within Storage Manager now, we have enhanced functionality that enables you to display all of the indexes and all of the views, even if they're created outside of the default DB space. So for example, this database was created in data space 1, but I have a particular table that's created in the root DB space. It used to be that you would have to query by DB space to find all the tables in a database. That's no longer the case. Everything is available to you. We do allow you to filter by values. So if you're looking for a particular table or a table root name or index name, you can again search for that. And this is the last section, just general IHQ information. We've upgraded all the open source libraries. We've white scanned vulnerability, tested everything. We've fixed defects that either we've discovered through our testing and development, or customers have alerted us to. And that is everything that is in FC7. Well, thank you for your time. I hope this has been of value to you. And I will turn the time back over to the good doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. You gave us a lot of information, and now we have to digest this, to learn, to interchange some experiences. There were 3 factors which I want to point out that are very important for us. First of all, the technical input you give to us. This is something that is important for our daily work. And also this feeling that the developing work on Informix is going on. That is very important also to propagate that in our companies, so that we can see the future is there, the support is existing, and now also the possibility to have an international contact to other persons having the knowledge on Informix. It will support us very much. And on the other hand, I want to thank you very much. I hear that your presentations are very well structured with a lot of information, also practical information. And I was very impressed because of your clear pronunciation and the speed of your talking. I'm not sure if that's the way you do every time, or you were taking into account that this is not our language that we use every day. And in this way of your presentation, Mr. Doe, it was possible for us to follow all your ideas, your information, and maybe some other comments from the participants. Dr. Weininger, what was your impression? Was all this information available already here in Germany? Did you have some questions from our customers that we can cover now with the knowledge we got today?
No, I also was very impressed by the presentation of Carlton, and I have nothing to add.
And I will follow the contact to the United States, because I think if you have also the questions, the feeling, and you have also the contact to the German community, it will help you to show in the United States that we have a customer base in this beautiful country, and we are continuing using Informix. And this is a strategic decision for our companies, and we continue with that. I thank you very much again. Thank you for all the participants. You will get the information of the next seminars, webinars in our website. And also this presentation will be available on the members side of our webpage. Have a nice day. I see you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Vielen Dank nochmal an alle Teilnehmer. Sie werden die weiteren Informationen bekommen. Bitte erzählen Sie das weiter und wir werden uns mit Ihnen dann kurz schließen, damit Sie diese Informationen zur Verfügung haben.